Hi, my name is Audrey, and I am 28 years old. At my sister's college graduation party that year, she looked me dead in the eye and smirked. Someone who didn't go to college is going to fail at every single job they try. My parents, sitting right next to her, immediately chimed in. You should just be the maid for the whole family. That's the best job you could possibly do. I didn't argue back then. I stayed silent not out of weakness, but because I knew if I opened my mouth, I would say things I could never take back. But now that same arrogant sister is standing right in front of me, desperately begging for a favor. They stripped away every ounce of respect, and were absolutely certain that someone without a degree like me would soon come crawling back to beg for scraps. They were dead wrong. The very moment my own flesh and blood treated me like a servant, I decisively turned my back and walked away, taking their harsh contempt as my ultimate weapon for survival. The exact person who once trampled all over me is now desperately clinging to the lobby of the building I personally run, dragging along a massive debt to beg me to bear the consequences of her failures. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel out and motivates us to bring you more amazing stories. That toxic atmosphere and blatant discrimination did not just appear overnight. It had followed me for years. The glaring contrast between us reached its absolute peak during that graduation season. Chelsea paraded around our house holding her shiny bachelor degree like a golden ticket guaranteed to conquer the world. She had spent 4 years taking easy classes while our parents happily funded her comfortable lifestyle. To reward her for finishing a basic academic program, they bought her a brand new luxury sedan. They parked it in the middle of the driveway with a massive red ribbon on the hood, loudly bragging to neighbors about how their eldest daughter was destined for immense corporate greatness. Meanwhile, my reality looked completely different. While she lived luxuriously on their dime, I spent those exact same 4 years working relentlessly at a high-end floral design studio owned by Mrs. Gable in downtown Portland. My exhausting days started long before the sun even came up. I unloaded heavy crates of fresh blooms off early morning delivery trucks. I stood in a freezing cooler and spent endless hours stripping sharp thorns off thick rose stems until my raw fingers bled. I scrubbed hundreds of glass vases with strong bleach and hauled buckets of murky water across the slippery concrete floor. My uniform was permanently stained with dark soil and sticky tree sap. My parents actively despised what I did for a living. Every time I walked through the front door, exhausted from a brutal 14-hour shift, they would loudly complain about the smell. My father would dramatically wrinkle his nose and ask why I tracked cheap dirt into his pristine house like a common laborer. My mother would shake her head in sheer disgust, telling me that women with permanently stained fingernails would never amount to anything respectable. They viewed honest physical labor as a shameful disease. In their deeply judgmental eyes, I was a complete failure who chose to play in the mud instead of sitting quietly in a clean university lecture hall. I let them talk. I ignored their daily insults because they had absolutely no idea what I was actually doing. They genuinely thought I was just a mindless floor sweeper, but I was secretly receiving an intensive masterclass in business survival. Mrs. Gable saw my relentless work ethic and generously took me under her wing. She did not just teach me how to arrange beautiful centerpieces. She taught me the brutal realities of running a highly profitable company. I learned how to aggressively negotiate wholesale prices with local farmers. I mastered the complex art of managing tight luxury event budgets, calculating strict profit margins, and handling demanding clients. I absorbed every crucial detail about logistics and inventory control. While Chelsea proudly waved an expensive piece of paper that merely proved she could pass tests, I was quietly building the exact real-world skills required to build an unstoppable empire. Once my skills were completely solid, I decided to resign from my position at the floral shop to officially open my own independent design studio. Taking that massive leap required a decent amount of initial capital. I desperately needed funds to lease a small commercial space and purchase essential wholesale supplies. Years earlier, my parents had made a firm verbal promise to lend me a specific amount from a joint family savings account whenever I felt ready to establish my own career path. Armed with a meticulously prepared business plan, I approached my father. I spread the documents across the polished dining table, eagerly explaining my projected profit margins and target client demographics. He did not even bother to look at the papers. He slowly set down his coffee mug and coldly announced that the savings account was entirely empty. I stood there completely paralyzed and asked him to explain where the money went. Without showing a single shred of remorse, he stated that he had recently withdrawn every last penny to fund a spectacularly extravagant wedding. Chelsea had just gotten engaged to a flashy real estate agent who cared more about expensive watches than actual character. To impress his wealthy associates, she demanded a lavish ceremony at the most exclusive country club in the city. I stared at him in pure disbelief. I desperately reminded him of our long-standing agreement and how I had sacrificed years of my youth preparing for this exact milestone. My father simply scoffed. He looked deeply offended that a lowly laborer dared to question his ultimate authority. He stared right through me and delivered a sentence that instantly killed any remaining illusion of family loyalty. He sharply declared that substantial financial resources must be invested in someone who actually possesses a bright future and a respectable academic education, rather than being foolishly wasted on a glorified dirt shoveler. The sheer cruelty of his twisted logic hit me like a physical blow. A massive argument erupted, shaking the very foundation of the house. My mother quickly rushed into the dining room, but she only amplified the betrayal. She aggressively defended his actions, screaming that Chelsea desperately needed a flawless high society wedding to secure her new elite status, while my silly little flower hobby could easily wait another decade. At that exact moment, my entire worldview shifted. The bitter truth was finally undeniably clear. This heated fight was never truly about the missing funds. It was about the devastating reality that my value as a human being meant absolutely nothing to them. I was nothing more than a disposable peasant living in the shadow of their golden child. I did not scream back. I did not cry or beg for their non-existent affection. An icy, heavy clarity suddenly washed over my exhausted mind. I turned around and calmly walked upstairs to my cramped bedroom. I pulled a battered duffel bag from the closet and rapidly packed my essential clothing along with my professional cutting tools. I carried my heavy bag down the wooden stairs, walking right past them in the hallway, without making a single second of eye contact. My father furiously shouted that if I dared to walk out that front door, I would be completely dead to him. I did not even flinch. I silently opened the heavy door and stepped out into the freezing night, leaving that suffocating prison behind forever. Surviving in the incredibly expensive city of Portland, with absolutely nothing but my bare hands, forced me to exhaust every ounce of my strength inside crumbling rented apartments. 7 long years slowly passed, creating 2 entirely different life trajectories. I stubbornly gritted my teeth and brutally worked 16 hours every single day without taking a single weekend off. I had absolutely no financial safety net, so failure was simply never an option. I personally carried massive bundles of heavy wet floral foam and towering branches of imported orchids up steep flights of stairs because I could not afford any delivery assistance. I aggressively fought for every single tiny budget wedding contract I could possibly find in the local directories. I spent countless sleepless nights hunched over a cheap folding table, drafting intricate event proposals and desperately calculating tight profit margins. Slowly but surely, those grueling years of invisible sacrifice began to compound. My tiny makeshift operation steadily evolved into a highly exclusive, high-end event empire. Wealthy, high-society brides eventually started begging for my private consultations, and my professional corporate calendar booked up years in advance. I successfully transformed my raw desperation into a thriving reality. directly contrasting my hard-fought ascent. The perfectly constructed illusion surrounding Chelsea rapidly shattered into a million pieces. Her prestigious university degree proved absolutely useless when real-world disaster finally struck. Her ridiculously flashy marriage completely imploded the exact moment the luxury housing market experienced a massive, sudden downturn. Her arrogant real estate husband predictably declared total bankruptcy and cowardly fled the state in the middle of the night, leaving behind a terrifying mountain of unpaid debts. Chelsea was suddenly left entirely alone with a young child and absolutely zero practical survival skills. She had spent her entire privileged life acting like a pampered princess, expecting everyone else to seamlessly solve her complicated problems. Facing actual severe adversity for the very first time, she completely panicked. Instead of actively searching for entry-level employment or utilizing her supposed elite education, she packed her expensive designer bags and immediately retreated to the only comfortable safety net she ever knew. She moved right back into my parents' house, bringing her screaming toddler and her deeply ingrained entitlement. Since she fiercely refused to accept any regular job she considered beneath her pristine academic status, she remained completely unemployed. She quickly fell back into her old destructive habits of mindless spending to artificially cope with her massive public embarrassment. She actively demanded premium organic groceries, expensive childcare services, and brand new outfits to desperately maintain a fake wealthy image on social media. My father blindly funded her entire delusional lifestyle without asking any logical questions. He quietly drained his hard-earned retirement funds to desperately cover her mounting credit card bills and endless personal expenses. The massive financial wealth he had proudly hoarded to protect his golden child was rapidly bleeding out. Chelsea shamelessly acted like a giant parasite, ruthlessly draining the very people who had arrogantly claimed she was their ultimate successful investment. While I was busy signing lucrative corporate contracts and proudly purchasing my very first commercial warehouse, they were silently drowning in a suffocating ocean of their own making. The pristine luxury facade they had cruelly sacrificed my future to build was now completely collapsing under its own hollow weight. One busy midweek morning, a local newspaper article detailing my company securing the largest regional event design contract was unexpectedly published. The glossy business feature prominently displayed a massive full-page photograph of me standing confidently inside my sprawling new commercial warehouse. It explicitly highlighted my exact age of 28 and publicly celebrated my rapid rise to becoming a dominant corporate executive in the competitive luxury event industry. That single highly publicized media feature completely shattered the quiet, invisible existence I had carefully maintained for years. My massive financial success was suddenly broadcasted to the entire city, instantly exposing my exact professional location to the very people I had permanently left behind. A few short hours after the morning publication, my private office phone gently buzzed. My lead receptionist sounded incredibly hesitant when she quietly announced that 3 uninvited guests claiming to be my immediate relatives were currently demanding access downstairs. She nervously explained that they were frantically pacing around the front entrance, appearing deeply distressed. I immediately stopped reviewing my pending vendor contracts and slowly walked over to the towering glass window of my second-floor executive suite. I looked down into the grand marble lobby and silently observed the pathetic scene unfolding below. My father, my mother, and Chelsea were standing awkwardly near the imposing security desk. The physical transformation was absolutely staggering. They looked incredibly disheveled and completely drained of life. The expensive tailored suits and arrogant postures they used to proudly display were permanently gone. My father wore a severely faded, wrinkled jacket, and his tired shoulders slumped heavily under the crushing, invisible weight of massive, insurmountable debt. My mother nervously clutched a cheap, worn-out handbag, aggressively darting her anxious eyes around the luxurious corporate environment with obvious, intense intimidation. Chelsea stood slightly behind them, looking entirely unrecognizable. The arrogant golden child who once paraded around demanding endless royal treatment now looked completely broken and thoroughly defeated. Her previously flawless appearance was entirely ruined, and her shrinking posture screamed sheer, desperate panic. They looked exactly like a tragic group of lost strays desperately searching for a miraculous financial rescue. I stood quietly behind the thick soundproof glass, feeling absolutely zero sympathy or lingering sadness. The fiery, burning resentment that once actively fueled my early brutal survival had long been replaced by a cold, indifferent emptiness. I watched them nervously shuffle their feet on my expensive imported marble floors for another long minute. I calmly walked back to my large, polished mahogany desk and firmly pressed the intercom button. Using a flat, emotionless professional tone, I instructed my receptionist to print their visitor badges and immediately escort them directly up to my private office. I leaned back in my heavy leather executive chair and silently waited to see exactly what kind of tragic performance they were about to deliver. Thomas timidly stepped into my luxurious wood-paneled office, with his eyes constantly avoiding the suffocating tension in the room. He walked slowly, as if the thick plush carpet were made of thin glass, while my mother and Chelsea followed closely behind like defeated shadows. I did not stand up to greet them. I simply sat behind my massive mahogany desk watching their every move, with a chilling silence that made Chelsea visibly shiver. They huddled together on the expensive leather sofa, looking completely out of place in a room that cost more to furnish than their current net worth. My father cleared his throat several times before finally speaking in a trembling voice that lacked every ounce of the booming authority he once used to crush my spirit. He started with a pathetic attempt at small talk about how proud they were of my success, but I cut him off with a single cold stare. He then dove into a rambling, desperate explanation of their financial ruin. He shamelessly asked me to pay off Chelsea's astronomical credit card debts and her failed business loans because we were family. My mother chimed in with tears streaming down her face, begging me to remember our blood bond. Then came the most breathtakingly arrogant request of all. My father leaned forward and firmly suggested that I should appoint Chelsea as my new chief operating officer. He actually had the audacity to claim that because she possessed a prestigious university degree, she was far more qualified to manage the high-level corporate side of my empire, while I could go back to focusing on the manual labor. I leaned back in my heavy leather chair and felt a wave of icy calm wash over me. I did not shout, or show even a flicker of anger. I simply let the silence stretch out until they began to fidget in their seats. I looked directly at Chelsea, who was staring at the floor in shame, and then at my parents, who were waiting for me to save them. I slowly spoke with a voice that was flat and razor-sharp. I asked them if they remembered that graduation party 7 years ago. I asked if they remembered the exact moment they told me I would fail at everything because I chose skills over a piece of paper. Their faces turned a sickly shade of pale as I repeated their own cruel words back to them. I calmly stated that since they once believed I was only fit to be a maid for this family, it was quite ironic that they were now begging that same maid for a financial lifeline. I looked Chelsea in the eye and told her that her expensive degree was currently worth less than the dirt I used to scrub off my fingernails because it had not taught her how to survive. I stood up slowly and leaned over my desk, staring my father down until he finally crumbled. I told them that I lived and thrived without a single penny of their help, and I certainly did not need an incompetent parasite disguised as an executive ruining the business I built with my own blood and sweat. I firmly pressed the button on my intercom and summoned my private security team. My father tried to launch into another guilt trip about family loyalty, but I simply held up my hand to silence him. I told them our relationship ended the night they stole my future to fund a wedding for a woman who could not even support herself. I stood by the window and watched as 2 large security guards firmly escorted my parents and Chelsea out of the executive suite. I did not look back as the heavy door clicked shut, effectively severing the final thread of our toxic connection forever. Only 2 weeks after the day they were escorted from my office, they decided to blackmail me with an absurd and groundless lawsuit. Being completely cornered and desperate for cash, Chelsea and my parents launched a vicious smear campaign against me on every social media platform they could find. They posted tearful videos and fabricated stories claiming that I had stolen family business secrets and abandoned my aging parents in their time of need. They even tried to sue me for a massive portion of my company assets, arguing that my success was built on the skills they had supposedly funded. It was a pathetic final attempt to use guilt and legal pressure to force me into submission. I did not hesitate for a single second. I immediately hired the most aggressive legal team in Portland and filed a heavy countersuit for defamation and ongoing harassment. My attorneys meticulously gathered every piece of evidence, including my employment records from Mrs. Gable and the bank statements proving they had never invested a single penny in my education or business. The court battle was swift and absolutely devastating for them. The judge saw through their clumsy lies and ruled entirely in my favor. They were ordered to pay astronomical legal fees and significant damages for the intentional harm they tried to cause my reputation. The financial consequences were the final blow to their crumbling house of cards. The massive court costs, combined with the crushing existing debts Chelsea had accumulated, forced Thomas to sell their family home. They lost the very roof over their heads and were forced to move into a cramped, low-income apartment in a part of town they used to mock. They reached out one last time with a series of frantic emails begging for mercy, but I simply blocked their addresses without reading a single word. The bridge was not just burned, it was completely obliterated. I chose to live in total silence from them because I finally realized that some people will only ever see you as a resource to be exploited, rather than a human being to be loved. This long and painful journey taught me a profound truth that I will carry forever. A university degree is nothing more than a fragile piece of paper if you lack the grit and the raw will to survive in the real world. Success is not handed out in lecture halls. It is forged in the dirt and the quiet hours of relentless hard work. Cutting ties with a toxic family is not an act of cruelty, but a necessary act of self-preservation. It is the only way to protect the life you worked so hard to build. I finally understood that achieving massive success was never about proving them wrong or seeking petty revenge. It was about liberating myself from a cycle of trauma and proving to myself that I was always enough. I am Audrey, and I am no longer defined by their narrow expectations, but by the empire I built with my own 2 hands. If you have ever been told that setting boundaries makes you selfish, I hope you remember that protecting yourself is not something you need to apologize for. You have the right to be respected. You have the right to say no. And you have the right to want more from your life. Maybe you have spent years trying to earn approval from people who had already decided how they wanted to see you. Maybe you worked harder, gave more, stayed quiet, and waited for the day they would finally recognize your worth. But sometimes that recognition never comes. And that does not mean you are lacking. It simply means that your value was never theirs to define. Treating yourself with kindness does not mean you love your family less. It does not mean you stop caring about the people who once mattered to you. In fact, learning to respect yourself is one of the foundations of healthy relationships. You can love someone and still say no. You can care about your family and still refuse to carry their responsibilities. You can forgive someone in your heart and still decide that they no longer have a place in your daily life. That is not cruelty. That is a boundary. And sometimes a boundary is the beginning of healing. Audrey's journey reminds us that walking away does not always mean giving up. Sometimes it means finally giving yourself the space to become the person you were never allowed to be around those who constantly underestimated you. If someone in your family has ever made you feel that you were not enough, I invite you to share your story in the comments. Your experience may help someone else realize that they are not alone. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. You can also explore more stories about family self-respect, personal boundaries, and emotional healing in the description. Thank you sincerely for staying with this story until the very end. And wherever you are in your journey, remember that you do not have to shrink yourself to keep someone else comfortable. Protecting your peace is not selfish. Sometimes it is the necessary step that allows you to finally live with dignity, freedom, and the courage to become yourself.